Blickling Hall is billed as one of the most haunted places in the UK. The estate has a long history. A house and gardens has stood on this land since at least the first half of the 15th century, when it was owned by Sir John Fastolf. After his death, the estate was purchased by the infamous Boylan family. The current house was built on the ruins of their old property in 1616 by Sir Henry Hobart. Blickling is a Grade 2 listed estate, owned and run by the National Trust since 1940. It consists of 4,777 acres. In addition to the house and gardens, there is woodland, parkland and farmland. The most well-known ghost that haunts here is that of Anne Boleyn, second wife of King Henry VIII. After unsuccessful attempts to get a son, he grew frustrated, and since Henry had already begun wooing his third wife, he had Anne convicted on trumped-up charges of treason. Anne had suffered so much that she welcomed death when it came. She was beheaded at the Tower of London in 1536. It is said her headless ghost, dressed in white, rides up to Blickling Hall every year on the anniversary of her death. As night falls on May the 19th, the coach, drawn by a headless horseman with her own head in her lap, pulls up to her old family home. When it reaches the house, the coach vanishes, and then roams the hall till daybreak. It's also said that when news of her death reached Blickling, 4 headless horses were seen dragging the body of a headless man across the surrounding countryside. The headless man is Anne's brother, Lord Rochford, and on the same night he continues to endure this ritual every year. Other hauntings at Blickling include Sir Henry Hobart, who died on August the 21st, 1698, the day after duelling with Oliver Leneve. His dying groans are heard in the west turret bedroom on the anniversary of his death. A duel stone stands on Norwich Road in Corston, in Norfolk, where the fight took place. The spirit of Sir John Fastolf, who was a knight in the 15th century and the basis for Shakespeare's Falstaff, has been reported by visitors. If you take a walk through the beautiful estate today, you might catch a sight or sound that cannot be explained. Do you dare? Originating in the hands of the Felbrigg family, whatever the estate first consisted of passed to John Windham at some unknown time prior to his death in 1475 and remained in his family for centuries. Sir Thomas Windham was a resident of Felbrigg and a counsellor to King Henry VIII. Born around 1466, Windham was a seaman by trade. Henry made him captain of the famous Mary Rose in 1512, and Windham served on her in the wars against the French that soon followed, getting knighted by the Fleet Admiral afterwards. He married twice and had many children, dying about 1522. One of his descendants, another John Windham, is the likely builder of Felbrigg Hall. Born in 1558, John is said to have inherited the hall from his cousin, Thomas, upon his death in 1599, because Thomas was childless, as were his 2 brothers. Windham played an important role in the defence organisation of Somerset County. Although the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 meant the feared invasion never came, the country was fired up by the defence movement and more engaged with defending themselves. Windham also served as a Justice of the Peace. His wife bore him 9 sons and 6 daughters. The hall was passed down to the Windham's 3rd son Thomas, and together they rebuilt the ancient house, completing it in 1624. John died in 1645 and Thomas in 1653. A lot of land was added to the estate over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries. The last Windham of Felbrigg was William Windham III. Born in 1750, Windham was a politician. Elected to Parliament in 1784, Windham became Secretary of War in 1794, but did not control war policy. He resigned from the government in February 1801 after the king rejected the Catholic emancipation. After reconciling with his party, Windham became Secretary for War and the Colonies in 1806. He again resigned over the Catholic emancipation, this time with his party in 1807. He vocally opposed peace with France in 1809. A lover of books, Windham was returning to his London home in July 1809 when he saw a house on fire a couple of doors away from a friend's house. His friend had a valuable library, so with the help of a couple of men, Windham removed most of the books before the fire reached Fred North's house. While removing some heavy books, Windham had fallen and bruised his hip. A tumour grew in the hip, and medical help had little effect. So, on doctor's advice, Windham had surgery in May 1810. He went to some trouble to receive the sacrament beforehand. The surgery was a success, but Windham didn't recover from the shock and died in his sleep in early June that year. Felbrigg has a fabulous Gothic library, filled with books by William and his father brought back from their travels. William is buried in the family vault at Felbrigg Church, and today he can sometimes still be found in the dark library at Felbrigg. His ghost is often seen standing by a table when his favourite volumes are laid out, or in an armchair by a roaring fire reading a book. William was the last of his line, since although he married, they had no children. So the hereditary succession of Felbrigg ended here. The estate had been in the Windham family uninterrupted for 350 years. His wife Cecilia owned the estate for the rest of her life, then it passed to William Lucan. He was related to Windham as the grandson of Windham's mother by her first marriage. Lucan was born in Felbrigg village in 1768. His father was a reverend. Windham had a special affection for all his half-brother's children. Young Lucan was a keen seaman. Starting out aged 13, he survived harsh life in the Navy. During his time he had command of 4 different ships and rose to the rank of Vice Admiral. In 1792, Lucan found himself caught up in the Spithead Mutiny. 16 ships mounted a collective mutiny and refused to sail. The crew's demands revolved around better pay and conditions. Some officers thought to treat their crews badly were sent ashore and their permanent removal demanded. Lucan helped calm things down, and this resulted in the mutiny being resolved peacefully, in an organised way. Within a few weeks the sailors' demands had been met and a royal pardon granted. A captain at the time, Lucan's ship, HMS Thames, was the first to be ready to resume its navy duties. Lucan retired in 1814 and settled into family life on a small farm close to Felbrigg with his wife and 12 children. In May 1824, Lucan inherited the Felbrigg estate. At the same time, he assumed the name Windham. The estate had lain untouched for 14 years at this point. Lucan had a remodel done, the house and stables were extended and altered. Lucan died in 1833 and Felbrigg passed to his eldest son, William Windham. Born in 1802, William was a Member of Parliament. He married and they had 1 son. After his death in 1854, the estate passed to this son, another William Windham. This William was born in 1840, and after his father died, his uncle became his guardian alongside his mother. But his uncle was often away at work, and his mother remarried a younger man, abandoning Felbrigg to live with him. In August 1861, aged 21, Windham inherited Felbrigg and married a woman his uncle didn't approve of. This led to his family claiming Windham was incapable of managing his own affairs, and he became the subject of the longest and most expensive lunacy case in British history. Windham won the case. He was found to be of sound mind and classed as an eccentric. His mother's family, the Herveys, had a reputation for eccentricity, which is notable. Windham was saddled with hefty legal fees after the case, and coupled with him frittering away his fortune, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. As part of this, he sold Felbrigg to John Ketton in 1863. Aged only 25, Windham died in 1866 and was buried in the family vault at Felbrigg Hall. In the shadowy woods at Felbrigg, you might still see Mad Windham driving his phantom coach, accompanied by a wind that comes out of nowhere and dies just as suddenly. John Ketton died in 1872 after disinheriting his eldest son, so Felbrigg came into the hands of Robert, who was 16 at the time and studying at Eton. After his mother's death, 13 years later, Robert lived in the hall with his youngest sisters, Marion and Gertrude. The ladies took a number of successful spirit photographs in the 1870s or 80s, and within years both were dead. Some think they were poisoned by toxic arsenic wallpaper. Gertrude died in 1895 and her heartbroken sister 3 years later. After their death, the estate fell into disrepair because Robert could no longer bring himself to care for it, and he lived out his years as a recluse. Robert handed the estate to his nephew, Windham Creamer, in 1924, before moving to Kent, stipulating that the family change their name to Ketton Creamer. The last private owner of the estate was Windham's son. Born in 1906, Robert Ketton Creamer inherited Felbrigg Hall in 1933. Ketton Creamer never married, and he was in fact closet gay, although close friends knew. At the time, homosexuality was still criminalised. He was godfather to his friends' children. Ketton Creamer served as the Justice of the Peace, and during the course of this was required to witness 2 hangings. He served in the Home Guard during World War II and was High Sheriff of Norfolk in the 1950s. Upon his death in 1969, he left Felbrigg to the National Trust. Today the hall is a Grade 1 listed building standing on around 1,760 acres, which includes expansive Grade 2 listed gardens and the Great Woods, which are also protected. In 2017, to mark the 50th anniversary of the decriminalisation of sexual activity between men, the National Trust held a special event at Felbrigg, which turned a bit controversial. This was part of National Pride and Prejudice campaign, with the LGBT theme running through their properties. Ketton Creamer's godchildren accused the Trust of using their godfather's private life as a publicity tool and said publicly outing him was against his wishes. The Trust requested its volunteers wear a special badge featuring their logo with the pride flag, and some refused. These volunteers were then asked to take backstage roles. The press called on the Trust to reverse their decision, and some National Trust members cancelled their membership. Eventually, they did a U-turn on the badges. So if you ever feel like a visit to Felbrigg Hall, keep your eyes open. You might see something unexplainable. Rainham was built in the early part of the 17th century. It was largely finished at the time of the owner's death, politician Sir Roger Townshend, in 1637. Rainham Hall was modernised 100 years later by architect and furniture designer William Kent, and this is essentially the house as it stands today. The hall is currently a private residence, still owned by the Townshend family, who offer tours for a fee. Famously haunted by the Brown Lady, the ghost has long been seen by family members, staff and visitors around the hall. She was first documented the Christmas of 1835, seen by 2 guests in the upstairs corridors as they retired to bed. The ghost's dated brown dress in particular caught their attention. Another time, one gentleman fired his revolver in the ghost's face. The lady vanished, and the bullet lodged in the inner door of the room across the corridor. A relative of the Townshends was so eager to come face to face with the ghost, he waited up one night, and when she appeared, he drew her. The lady wore a richly brocaded brown dress and a coif on her head. Disturbingly, she has dark hollow voids where her eyes should be. When the gentleman showed his sketch around the next morning, many servants gave notice and left the hall. The Brown Lady is said to be the ghost of Lady Dorothy Walpole, the prettiest sister of Britain's first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. Born in 1686, Dorothy married Charles Townshend around 1713 and was his second wife. Charles had a notoriously violent temper. The story goes that when he discovered Dorothy's affair with Lord Wharton, he punished her by locking her in her rooms at Raynham. Another account says Dorothy was entrapped by the Countess of Wharton. Either way, Dorothy died aged 40 in 1726 after a short confinement. Officially, she died of smallpox, but some say she was starved to death or died after being pushed down the grand staircase. The ghost was captured on film in 1936 by Country Life magazine photographer Captain Provand. This is one of the most famous paranormal photos in the world, and you've likely seen it before. Other spirits alleged to haunt Raynham are a dog, who is heard rather than seen, 2 ghostly children, and a charming red cavalier, said to be King Charles II's son, as the pair once stayed at Raynham Hall. In one room, heavy chairs are set against the walls, and sometimes in the morning they can be found gathered around a large card table. Feel like taking a trip to visit?